If at first you don't succeed, try again. That's a saying. When it comes to entering into a relationship which is a deal, an agreement between at least two parties where variable goods are exchanged, there does come a risk. If there's a reward, there exists a risk. No matter what you do in life, there's always going to be an opposite to whatever is at hand. If your life is going well, obviously the bad shit can happen. But if the bad shit happens, you can respond by being zen about it. If you are given rewards and you are reaping rewards consistently, there's always going to be a risk. And in another dimension, in order to get rewards, you actually have to go straight through risk, or sometimes avoid it, mitigate it. You have to be willing to take risks. I've taken big risks, and usually I've reaped pretty big rewards, actually, really big friggin' rewards from taking big risks. But sometimes it's not really worth it, because at the same time it can take years to go through this endurance period where you're kind of like, damn, it could be 3 years plus. It just takes a huge chunk out of you, and you have to kind of be on edge sometimes. Sometimes you're kind of keeping everything together. You're sort of under the radar. Obviously, you'd prefer to keep everything private to yourself. But the idea is, if you do want rewards, you have to go, like, there exists risk, and you have to be willing to take risks. And obviously, I don't know if a lot of people are afraid of risks. When you learn how to drive a car, people know that there's a risk of dying, but the risk of dying and getting injured, etc., it is small, but it is definitely way higher than having a plane crash. That's why when we take a flight to a different country or to a different city, we are taking a risk that we might die. We are taking the risk that the plane might crash. You know, there's a 0.1% chance we might survive. But we're willing to take that risk because it's so rare. It's so rare. Like, I think you literally do get struck by lightning more than falling out of a plane. Statistically speaking, I'm telling you, man. Now, this risk versus reward stuff, that's actually a scale system all in itself, right? You want to be willing to take risks in order to reap rewards. That's just part of the process. About a year or two ago, I came up with this sort of epiphany. I sort of sat myself down and I asked myself, what does it really take to get any girl that you really want? If you're a lass, it could be a dude. And I sat there, for a girl, you have to have the belief that you can and the leverage. It's just the two basic requirements. You need the belief that you can, and this can encompass, just imagine what this can encompass. It can encompass you visualizing this, seeing yourself as someone who is in possession of this sort of thing. This is why I say, you know, if Trump wanted to end the Ukraine war, he could, because he has the belief he can. And even if he wasn't able to follow through with his original idea of ending the war, he got way closer to achieving that than anyone else simply because he had this. That's quite powerful. And second is the leverage. And you can see both of these things, there are risks. And what we do, sometimes like a general in the battlefield, if we are aware, we analyze the risks that are made known to us. The problem is there's a lot of risks that we don't really foresee, and you could be paranoid about the risks, which can ultimately bring those risks into fruition, or you can be just a normal person and mitigate the risks like a normal person, or you can be completely oblivious, and being oblivious is one of the worst things you could ever do. Bad. being oblivious, that's very bad. Oblivious. Ignorant. Yeah, you could just say ignorant. Same. Ignorant. Very bad. You don't want to be ignorant. Because a lot of the time when we make decisions, we're making what we believe to be the best possible choice in the moment. There's a reason why decisions work the way they do. It's a very mechanical thing. I need a refresher on how decisions work mechanically, but basically, what makes something matter? That's the question we need to ask ourselves when making a decision. Why do we do the things we do? Why does anyone do what they do? We have to actually ask the question, what makes something matter? And what makes something matter is that it simply seeks to exist. And basically, because of that, it will try to eliminate anything that threatens that existence. And I guess you would sort of tend to lean towards whatever you identify with. So if you identify with a boulder as opposed to a pyramid, you know, which one lives, which one dies, if you lean towards one more than another, you will lean towards maybe boulder and the pyramid explodes. That's how choices are made. When it comes to risks analysis, how do we know about a certain risk? How do we know about, I don't know, maybe our romantic interest was a murderer in the past? Would that not have affected our decision at the moment, in the now? Sometimes when we're making decisions, we actually can monitor the scales fluctuating in the moment. They go up and then they go down. You're kind of indecisive, they say sometimes. You're trying to make up your mind. And unfortunately, this whole process of making up your mind, weighing up the scales like this, it's very exhausting. And this can also stem from choice paralysis. Like when you're in the grocery store, there's too many options and it's too many scales to calculate. This is why when you go to a Macca's or a Burger King, they're always next to each other. Why is that? It's because they know the scale system. They know when you walk past or drive by one of these fast food takeaway shops, they're not going to be far away from each other, because if they were far away from each other, you'd be like, will I go have Macca's tonight for dinner, or will I go home tonight for dinner? But instead, if they situate themselves next to each other, this is an environmental thing, by the way, the scale system then becomes, will I have Macca's for dinner, or will I have Burger King for dinner? And of course, there's more of these scales adding up as more shops sit next to each other, but that's fine. In a place like a grocery store, it does become a little too overwhelming. So that's how kind of choices come about, and that's how they kind of collapse, is you kind of are drawn more to one side than another. And then everything else kind of collapses out. And it kind of happened like that. As soon as the decision is made, boom, like that. The risk here is a lot of pain. Pain can be a result of failing. And that can be very painful. Until we perhaps change the way we see what some of these things mean for us. Maybe failing can actually be a good thing, and you fail more and more and more, and you actually grow from that. You grow from that. And that's where taking risks can actually be very rewarding in itself, because when you do fail, hopefully not something that lands you in lava or hot water, you learn from that. You become more of a veteran. And this is why veterans are a real thing, because they've been in the combat experience, they've taken the risks. You want to become more of a veteran IRL. And this is great leverage to possess, having more experience. This is what actually it is, it's experience. XP, IRL, like a video game. Now, what has all this got to do with relationships and stuff? Well, I was just really in the mood to make a video. I wasn't really sure about what, but I just thought I'd scramble a bunch of ideas and principles and things like that together, because it's like, this is how I think, this is how I operate, and this is what I want to teach. And I'm drinking coffee. I was going to go for a walk. My coffee's cold. Dang nabbit. But I was also thinking about something along the lines of not just risks in order to reap rewards, but the threats themselves in relationships. Things like, being abandoned, worse, cheated on, betrayed, right? How do you respond to those threats, especially when they're being rubbed in your face? If you watch my previous video and the one before that and all that, you can sort of tell that there's a system that I use to sort of snap myself into looking at opposites. And that's what we want to do. Instead of retaliating, we want to be Dalai Lama man, like Jesus walking on the stormy water. You want to be calm, relaxed, a little bit playful, unaffected, unfazed. That sounds very fine and dandy, especially when you read it in a book. Maybe you paid $50 for a PDF that said something similar. But that really is the number one way to respond to a crisis, really, is that you don't really respond. Particularly if you don't really have any appropriate means or leverage to combat the threat. Because if you're smart enough, you would realize that retaliating could make the fire a lot worse. And you're going to reap more fire. That's not something you really want to be rewarded. Not unless you are turning a crisis into some type of opportunity to make crisis a good thing for you. It's like in real estate or something. So you do not respond. This is what I do as my default. Do not engage. There is a time to build and there's a time to destroy. This is the Proverbs, the scriptures. There's a whole chapters in the Proverbs on this one. There's a time to build and a time to destroy. There's a time to live, there's a time to die. If you want the fire to die, you don't fight fire with fire. In a situation where it's not advantageous to you, do not engage, starve that. You could, when you become better eventually, I'm still learning this myself, use foam or water, in a sense, obviously, to mitigate that fire. Sandbags or whatever. But if you don't have those means at your disposal, then just simply do not engage. Do not put yourself in a position to begin with that would risk compromising your integrity, your relationship. But this doesn't mean to walk on eggshells and tiptoe and preemptively make things worse than they already are. It just means do not engage, because if you engage, you are just making things worse. This includes things like talking about, complaining, to be honest, if you are on the receiving end of a scuffle, you don't want the other party to talk to you. You don't care about what they're going through. The only thing that really matters to you in the heat of an argument or a scuffle or massive tribulation is that you don't want to be threatened, you want to be alone, you just want either a problem to be resolved or something. And in these moments, you just remove yourself from the situation. Do not engage. Remove yourself. Very important. Don't go trying to stamp your foot down and forcing the other party to see your ways. Don't try to shake the other party and make them realize the error of their ways, because you are only going to make things worse. The reward for doing anything like that is going to be very minimal, and the risk is going to be colossal. So it's very disproportionate. And you will learn a massive lesson if you ever have been through something like that, or are yet to go through something like that. If you go through something like that, you have a massive opportunity to change, and you can turn that whole crisis into your advantage. And this is where things like apologizing, this may or may not be sufficient depending on the context. Apologizing, forgiving, and that can help make things better. Now, at first, things might not really go anywhere, but over time, out of nowhere, something can happen good out of that. So at the end of the day, if I had to summarize what the hell I was just talking about here, I guess I'm saying that when you're dating and you're in a relationship setting, to enter into a relationship to start with, there's a risk to it. There's always risks. No matter what you're going to be doing, there's going to be risks. And you have to be okay with those risks. You have to be okay with putting yourself in the arena, in the fire, and getting burnt. You have to be okay with that, because that makes you become a veteran. But don't be blind. Don't be oblivious. Don't let your ego get the better of you. Don't be blind to these damn risks where it could be extremely disadvantageous to you, and you could not just get burnt, obviously, but it's going to be very difficult to come back from that. I guess, in summary, when there is massive tribulation or turbulence coming your way, if you don't know how to respond to that in an appropriate manner, then the risk of you engaging with that will not reap you a beneficial reward. So if there's yelling, arguments, the threats of divorce, etc., don't engage. Remove yourself from the situation. Don't put yourself in a position that would invite that type of environment to begin with. That's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed, learned something new.